Ah, yes, the intermediate plateau, the dreaded part of any language learner's journey. I actually think there's a fundamental misunderstanding of what the intermediate plateau is. It seems to me that a lot of people think that there is just a point in your language learning when you're not going to make progress despite your continued efforts. That's just how it is. But it's a little different. What happens is that there comes a point where you suddenly need to do different stuff in your language learning. There's different things you need to do and to learn that aren't the same as they were before. It's like there's a shift in the game that you're playing after you already learned the rules and got comfortable with the game, but nobody tells you that there was a sudden shift. And so you keep putting time and energy into the stuff that you're doing before, but that's no longer as relevant as this new stuff that you should be doing that nobody told you about. And it just so happens that this point often comes when you're comfortable with your language learning and your routine, so switching things up pretty drastically can be uncomfortable and a little frustrating. And boy, oh boy, have I been in this plateau for a while now, which is why this video is late. 3 months, 4 months, something like that. Now, I have been learning every single day, but I haven't really been putting time into the stuff that I know would push my language abilities forward. I've been doing this stuff that's comfortable and easy. I passed the 1,300 hours mark a couple of weeks ago, and I've been writing this video for so long that I've actually passed the 1,400 hour mark at this point. And a couple months ago, somewhere before that 1,300 hours, I just felt like I hit a wall. I wasn't making progress anymore. And I think there's a couple of reasons for that. And I'm not putting them out as excuses, but I want to reflect on what they are and see how I can fix these very solvable issues. The first is that I started going to the gym basically every single day, which sucked a lot of my physical and mental energy in the morning. The second thing is that 2 of my favorite Czech tutors stopped being able to give lessons. One of them got a real job and the other one went on a multi-month meditation tour on an island in Japan. That is not a joke. I was also very busy with end-of-year stuff at work, and so I had a lot of things going on, going through my head. And lastly, and probably most importantly, I didn't know what to do. Up until that point, the learning journey was pretty easy. I had laid things out and I knew what I was supposed to do every step of the way. But I'd gotten to the point where I hadn't mapped things out any further, and I just was wandering lost in the woods, essentially. And then, since my energy was zapped by those other things before, it was a lot harder to find my way out of the woods. And so if you feel like you're in a similar situation to me, where you're not making the progress that you want, I invite you to grab a snack, take a seat, and follow me on this journey as I try to unravel what was going wrong with my learning and get myself back on track again. The principal problem that I think I'm facing is that this is hard. Like, learning to speak and read and do all this stuff in Czech is hard. There is so much to do and improve at and things that I should be doing and yada yada that it's just overwhelming. And so I went the easy route and did the things that were easy and fun. Like 59% of the time was spent watching YouTube free flow, no subtitles, no extra learning, nothing. Which isn't inherently bad, but I'd say it's a lot like the language learning equivalent of an easy dessert. It is not the nutrient-dense immersion time spent with the language and getting better that it could be. And it absolutely dwarfed everything else I was doing. So I was having a massive portion of dessert every day with a little bit of broccoli and real protein in there. Basically, my learning time was being spent very mediocrely, if that's a word. Free flow isn't inherently a bad thing. In fact, it can be really helpful for solidifying your abilities and getting you more exposure to the language. But it should not be your primary thing that you're doing when you're still actively learning the language. And a similar thing was going on with my speaking. At the beginning, my goal was just to speak more. My goal was to be more comfortable speaking and having conversations in Czech. But then there's a certain point where I wanted to do more better output rather than just more output. I did that for a little while, but then I sort of got into the habit of just like chatting for 45 minutes twice a week, and that isn't the same quality output time that I was really needing. And so the first thing that I'm doing is getting more interactive time spent with the language, because that's where I really learn new words, push my abilities forward, and make myself better at the language. I've started doing intensive listening and sentence mining again, as well as reviewing those new words the day after. Because I've definitely felt the stunted vocabulary growth in the past couple of months. I don't feel like I'm expanding my vocab knowledge and abilities in the language, and I'm sort of falling behind, if anything. And I'm really glad that I now have new things to review every day. Free flow listening to YouTube and podcasts just isn't the same for vocab growth, especially if you're learning a very distant language from your native one. Something that doesn't share a lot of vocabulary with just some minor changes to pronunciation or spelling or meaning or something like that you can just pick up on. These more distant languages, basically anything in category 3 and category 4, just have thousands upon thousands of words that you basically need to be told what they mean or else you're never going to figure it out. And now going back to my output, I put my italki classes on hold for a couple of weeks because I needed some time to rest, get through the holidays, and also to make and write this video. But I'm already getting back into it with a new outlook on things, and it feels quite nice. I do enjoy speaking Czech, but I'm not going to let these classes just become chatting classes again as they were before. I have some actual things I want to improve. Our current model for improving your output has 4 aspects to it: your comfort, your accuracy, your automaticity, and your capability. I've already done the comfort part by just speaking a lot and getting comfortable speaking and writing in Czech, but my accuracy has a lot of work to do. And there are 3 specific things that I want to focus on. The first one is vocabulary, being able to use more and more specific words betterly. The second is about natural phrasings of things, because when I hear them spoken, it's obvious. It's like, oh yeah, that sounds way better. But my brain doesn't always go to these patterns to express my ideas. And this is where writing is really helpful. You have the time to sit down, to look at it, to reread it, to play with different formations of your own thoughts and see what makes the most sense to you, and then check with a tutor, either human or AI, to find a more natural way to phrase something. I've even set up my sentence mining so that it's very easy to save those to my Anki cards to review later to get more reviews with the more natural phrasings of my own thoughts. And the third thing is using obtuse grammar concepts. Languages are just crazy. Your native language's grammar makes sense because it just does, okay? But when you're learning a foreign language, it's very clear where all of the weird things are, the logical mistakes, the overlapping patterns that make no goddamn sense. But you gotta figure it out. When I hear these grammar concepts, they might make a lot of sense. I can look at a Czech sentence or hear somebody say something and understand what they mean and even be able to identify the parts of a sentence. But when I go to turn my thoughts into language, it doesn't always come out in the most grammatically natural way. I'm often right, but I'm also very often not right, which is to say, wrong. One of the specific traps that I fall into that a lot of 6-year-olds also struggle with is called over-regularization. And basically, this is where you apply a rule in too many places that it shouldn't be applied. An example from English is adding ed to the end of a word to make it a past tense version, right? I hope, I hoped. I like, I liked. But that doesn't work with everything. You can't say I goed or I runned. And so a child or a learner saying I runned would be an over-regularization of the rule. And I do that a lot in Czech. I say a correct pattern or a correct thing in the wrong place, which is honestly pretty frustrating because if you're like half right, but also very obviously wrong still, and it's like, yeah, I see why you did that, but you're also just totally wrong. Does that ever happen to you? And so again, writing is very useful, which is why I set out to write some blog posts on Journaly, which was pretty nice until I just completely forgot I was doing that. It was around the time I started watching the 2nd season of Arcane, so I think I got really wrapped up in that because it's a really good show, highly recommend. And so, funny enough, this is actually the best time to do more traditional grammar study of a language. I've been putting it off because I find it to be pretty dull, but I did make a grammar primer for Czech that I'm pretty happy with. I just need to study it a bit more and put in more time there. However, I'm not going to go full in on it because I do want to save myself a bit for when I go to the Czech Republic, because I want to make a video where I go into a more traditional in-person classroom and see what the experience is like after 2 years of immersion learning. So make sure you're subscribed so that you don't miss any of the videos that I make while I'm in Europe later this year. But also, all natives go through some kind of grammar learning, and specifically with Czechs, it's relatively intense since the written official Czech language is pretty different from the spoken one in a lot of ways, but most people that go through school know that because they studied it. I'm going to resist going off onto a tangent about that because that is not the purpose of this video. I've already cut out several different tangents that I've wanted to go on. But in the meantime, until I go to my actual Czech class, I'm going to be doing 2 things to improve my grammar ability. The first one is corrected writing, and the second is sentence identification. Let's break down that one first, because it's a little bit easier to explain. So basically, you take a sentence and identify the things that you're trying to work on within the sentence. In my case, it's nouns and gender and cases. So I look at the different nouns in there, I think about how they're being used, what pattern applies to them, and that kind of thing, and then I check my work. But maybe a Spanish learner is having trouble with the conjugations and verbs, and so they identify the verbs, break down who's doing what to make sure that they're understanding exactly what's happening in the sentence. A lot like that, but a little bit more complicated. Corrected writing is a little bit more in-depth, but also pretty easy to explain. First, you write some text, then you try to correct it yourself, then you go into a class with a tutor and you read it aloud, and they'll stop you after each sentence or every couple sentences to give comments on where it could be more natural, on where things were weird, and then you can improve it even further. This can also be great for your pronunciation if you're working on that. You can even skip the writing the text yourself part, but that's not my focus. My focus is mostly on the phrasing and how I write things. I've actually given myself the challenge of writing, scripting, filming, and editing an entire video in Czech for this channel, so that's another reason to stay subscribed. It's going to take me a while because I'm not the fastest writer, and I have to go through a lot of corrections and that kind of thing, but it should be interesting, and I hope that the results speak for themselves. All right, let's go back to that list of things that were taking my energy and make sure that I target all of them one at a time. The first one was the gym in the morning taking a lot of energy. That's already kind of resolved because I'm a lot more used to it now. I just don't feel as physically exhausted, but I have made sure to put a lot more of my harder learning before the gym so that I don't have to come back fatigued and then start doing the hard stuff. I've already done it by the time that I get back and then can relax with a little bit of the easy stuff after that. The second thing about the tutors, I've already mentioned that I'm going to try to find some new ones and mix things up a bit, so that shouldn't be as much of a problem anymore. At work, things are a little more calm. It's not nearly as hectic after the holidays, so I'm feeling better there. I have more mental energy and I'm ready to go. And then the last thing about being lost and not knowing what to do, I think I've mostly solved by making this video, or at least I hope I did. And because it works for me, I actually wrote a physical plan calendar out for my mornings that is very helpful for following what I've said I'm going to do. I just look at it and I do the thing. So that's number 4, basically solved there. At least right now, I feel very solid on my plan to continue forward, and I'm very excited about the future, and then also going to the Czech Republic, which should be really cool. Now, let's quickly recap this video. First, the intermediate plateau is when the game suddenly changes and you have to adapt at a point where you don't really want to adapt and you're kind of comfortable, which is exactly what happened to me, and I hit a wall. And so I stopped to reflect on what was draining my energy, what I wanted to improve at, and then I started to make a plan of what I could do to actively improve on all of those things. All that's left is to implement those changes and see what happens. Now, I want to take a quick second to talk about the Refold app, which you can actually download now from the link in the description below. As I'm recording, it's not fully public yet, so you can't search it in the App Store, but that should be relatively soon. So click on the link down below to get it today. Why download it? Great question. So as I make these videos, I go back through my Czech learning history and look at what happened. I can actually look at each month and see my trends, my history, what I was doing, and then reflect on that and see how I can improve. Having my Czech learning history has been incredibly valuable. But you might be saying, I'm already halfway through, it doesn't make any sense to start now, which I would also say is not true because I've been picking up German for the first time in 7 or 8 years just for the past couple months, and I started tracking from zero using the Refold app, and it's already been helpful. I can see what I'm doing every day, I can see how much progress I'm making, and so it basically combines a lot of the ideas that we talk about and I talk about in my videos into a nice package that you can use for your language learning. So click the link in the description below to join me and almost 2,000 other learners tracking over 1,000 hours of language learning per day. That's pretty darn cool if you ask me. Anyway, that's everything for this video. I hope that you enjoyed. If you feel like you're in a bit of a similar situation as me, I invite you to take a few minutes to write a comment below and reflect on your own learning. Why aren't you making the progress that you want to? What are the things that you need to work on and how can you actually work on them? I'll see you then. Happy immersing.
I'm here to drop some knowledge, listen up with your ears. I got a language learning method, gonna make it crystal clear. It's called Refold, the game changer, gonna blow your mind. Immerse yourself in media, fluency you will find. Refold.
So, as I make these videos, my light went off. I don't know if you can probably. Whoa!